Now, the number 4 and 3 pick are a whole nother area of disparity. This is an area, this kind of 3 to 4 range on the list that it's very thought provoking when you think about it, because these two guys are very closely related, and they're almost interchangeable. Now, let me just say this as a disclaimer. I'll tell you right now, number 1 and number 2 on this list are very interchangeable, and it's very much like last week when we had, Trevor Lawrence and Tua Tagovailoa. They were almost interchangeable. So if you haven't listened to that, go back and check that out. But number 1 and 2 on this list again are very interchangeable, and it could be back and forth. I mean, there's probably a 0.0001% disparity between these two guys. But back to number 3 and 4. Number 4 is a guy that a complete all-star. A complete all-star. And you could argue that this guy could be number 1 or 2. But he's number 4 on my list simply because of the quarterback catalyst. He's on a team that is not very good historically within the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, they haven't been anything special. Just not great. And, as much as I like the quarterback that he is going to be playing under next season, he's also not great. I think he's a guy that has pretty good potential. He's just kind of not great. But here's the thing. And by the way, number 4 is Antonio Brown. And I'll let that sink in, because if some of y'all were putting a list together, he would probably be number 1 or 2. I get it. But he's number 4 because he has Derek Carr throwing him the ball. And I'm a big fan of Derek Carr. Love Derek Carr. Great guy. Good morals. I love his stance on things. I love his stance on the league. I love his stance on player ethics. But historically, in the last couple of years, he hasn't been as good as he's getting paid. Of course, at one time, a couple of years ago, he was sort of the first, he was the first to start the highest paid quarterback cycle. Of course, then Matt Stafford, he had to get the number 1 highest paid quarterback, and then blah blah blah, so on and so on. But he was sort of the first guy to start the conversation of paying quarterbacks big bucks, is Derek Carr, historically. And ever since then, he just hasn't really been that great. So that's why AB is going to be. That's why Antonio Brown has to be number 4, just because he's not going to be on a great team. And the same way with Odell, he wasn't producing what he should have produced with Eli Manning and the Giants. He just wasn't, and that's just that. AB is a better wide receiver than Odell skill wise, no doubt, with skill and athleticism. But it's because of the team that he's on that it's going to be a little difficult to say whether or not he's going to be number 1, or number 2, or even number 3. That's why he has to be number 4, because you're better than Odell, but you're not going to be on a solid, good team like everybody else. So, with that being said, we're going to go to number 3. Now, this one, you could argue, and with a lot of what I'm about to say, but here's the thing. When Antonio Brown left the Giants, let me say this: when any really good player leaves a good team with other good players, but when your star leaves, there is a huge vacuum in, okay, who's the next man up? Who's going to be the next star? Like when Tim Duncan left the Spurs, a huge vacuum. Of course, you still had Tony and Ginobili, but I'm just saying the star. When Tim Duncan left the Spurs, we were looking at ourselves and okay, who's going to be the next man? Who's going to be the next star? And it was Kawhi Leonard, and that was sort of the birth of Kawhi Leonard. Same thing can be said for Tim Duncan when when David Robinson left the Spurs, okay, who's going to be the next star? Tim Duncan. Okay, so when Antonio Brown leaves a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's the star of that team, and he's playing with some really good players, but he leaves now, and you got a decent quarterback that's getting up in age, and you've got a pretty decent offensive line and a pretty decent Steelers defense. And then you got Juju Smith-Schuster, who had a phenomenal season last year. Even with AB on the team, Juju still, put up immaculate numbers. He was basically the relief receiver for Ben. You can't really cover AB and Juju at the same time with the same caliber of guys. It's just very hard. Teams don't have those type of defenses unless you're playing in like the Pro Bowl. But so when your star leaves, by the way, if you're keeping up with the game, Warriors just won. So game 2, it's 1-1 series going to game 3. Here we go. Anyway, side note, when your star leaves, Juju is the next man up. It's obvious. Juju is the next man on that receiving core that is going to be the star. He's going to be the number 1 receiver, the primary receiver, the hot route receiver on every down, every passing down, and Big Ben's going to be looking for him the whole way, every step of the way. So I'm just saying, this is going to be where Juju sort of comes into himself. Now, we've seen a lot of good things from Juju already, and I'm not saying that he hasn't reached his potential. We don't really know. I can't sit here and tell you that he hasn't or that he has. I'm just saying, if there was any time for Juju to reach his peak or to start peaking in his career, it'd be now, because you don't have, you're not filling anyone's shoes. You are the shoes. Okay? Hashtag you are the shoes. You know what I'm saying? Juju's the next man up. He's the guy for Pittsburgh now. And it's going to be very crucial that we all watch to see how good he does this season, because if he doesn't, then Pittsburgh needs to look at another receiver, because that's really their guy. You need a star on your team, and Big Ben's on his way out, so you need a guy. Okay? So, with that being said, Juju's number 3. Now, you could argue that AB should be number 3 and Juju should be number 4. You could say that because of, obviously, Antonio Brown objectively is a better wide receiver, objectively. But I love the mentality of Juju here, because first of all, he's a good guy. I think he's a quiet person, and I like quiet players in the NFL just because it's not common. You don't see it a lot. But I like guys that kind of, just play the game. Just play the game and be good at it. Like Kawhi Leonard, you got to respect his quietness on the court. Off the court, there's drama, historically, but I love players like that who just compose themselves, act like you've been there before, and celebrate with your team, of course, but just keep yourself composed. Don't throw things on your sideline. Don't cuss out your coach or a fan, or just get in fights for people for publicity. Just don't do that, okay? Don't be an Odell. Be a Juju, all right? It gives you points for my list here. All right, now we're moving into a part of the list that is very, very challenging. And look, going from when I first thought of this entire series, I could pretty much tell you number 1 and 2 for everyone on this list. It's very easy to do that part. The hard part is figuring out who's number 1 and who's number 2. Right? Like I can tell you that, okay, Tua and Trevor Lawrence are going to be number 1 and 2 for the college football quarterbacks. Easy. I could have told you that a year ago. Just like I could have told you the number 1 and 2 for the NFL wide receivers this week. I could have told that to you years ago. And so I'm just going to go ahead and say number 1 and number 2 are Julio Jones and DeAndre Hopkins. And man, oh boy, Nico, I know when you listen to this, you're going to be fuming because we've had this conversation before. We have had this same argument of who's the best wide receiver. You say D-Hop. I say you have a very strong argument, but I'm going to say Julio. And I think I have a strong argument as well. I'm going to go ahead and make the case for you because I know what you would say. He had, one drop ball last season? Maybe zero. One drop, no drop balls last season. Incredible. And that's why he's number 2 on the list and very close to. He's a smaller guy, a smaller receiver. Not really any faster. I don't think it's if it would be, it'd be by a small margin. But I think that matters in the NFL. It's hard to cover a taller guy, a bigger guy, and Julio is just a monster, man. He's huge, and he's fast. He's elusively fast. I would give agile points to D-Hop slightly, just because he's a little bit smaller and he could move maybe quicker. I mean, that's just physics and that's how it works. But so I'll give agility points to D-Hop. I'll give power points, strength points, and size points to Julio. And the no drop balls thing is a no doubt impressive feat. Yards per game. Let's just look at last season. I know I wouldn't determine this list off of last season stats, but just to give you an idea of these two players and how close they are. Julio Jones had 104.8 receiving yards per game compared to D-Hop's 98.25 yards per game. They both had around 10 targets per game. Of course, Julio had a 10.6 and D-Hop had a 10.2. Receptions, they're in the hundreds, very close. 113 for Julio and 115 for D-Hop. It's very close. Last year, Julio had 100 more receiving yards than D-Hop at 1,677 compared to D-Hop's 1,572. Of course, Julio had 8 receiving touchdowns and D-Hop had 11. It goes back and forth. No doubt that these two players are the number 1 and number 2 receivers. You can't deny that D-Hop has probably the greatest hands in the NFL right now. No drop ball. At least last season he did, for sure. Best hands in the NFL last season. But I think a close second hands-wise is Julio Jones, and you cannot underestimate size in this league. You can do it in college football. You can underestimate size in college, or you shouldn't underestimate size in college football or high school football. I know because I was never the biggest player when I played, but people would underestimate me and get their butt whooped. In the NFL, you can't say that. You can't be small and extremely successful in the NFL. Always you got to give credit to the bigger guy in the NFL, because I think the point is it's easier to get away with being small in college or high school. Obviously you can get it done in the NFL, but it's way more difficult to get away with being smaller compared to a bigger competitor, just because you're moving faster, and in physics, momentum says that mass times velocity gives you a bigger momentum. So if you have more mass, then you're going to have more power behind you. If you're going at the same speed. I'm just saying here, head to head, Julio takes it just because of his size, and it's very close. It's a very close margin. No doubt D-Hop has the best hands, but Julio's hands are right there behind him. I think when you look at red zone wide receivers, I think of Julio Jones, and if he's being double covered, just throw the ball up to him. He'll just go up and get it and pull it down, and you can't stop him. He has strong hands. That's just how it is. You can't really defend against that. So I know it's controversial. I know I know that